Welcome to Red House Design lighting setup tutorial video. Today we're going to try to set up lights for this open space interior. So let's start by creating our base render. So we have some reference point, and I've already preset my final render, all the effects and settings. As you can see in here, I'm going to take you through all of them after we set our lights up. Now, as you can see, a couple of materials are already emitting light in here. I'll show you how to do that. You just basically go to Material tab, you click on a particular material that you want the light to be emitted from, or to behave like a light source. And down here in these settings, you go to emissiveness, and when you move the slider you can see the change in the material. So I'm gonna keep it somewhere in here. Confirm, and we can return back to our Objects tab and start working with our lights. I'm going to switch on the first layer of lights that we have in here, and as you can see, it is all these spotlights around the living room and the kitchen as well. So when I select one of them, here are the settings. Particularly for these spotlights, I'm using a pretty narrow beam of light. The color of the light I want to keep white, and here is the brightness value that I already adjusted before. I needed to do a couple of test renders to know the exact value that would work for our final render. So here we have a couple of the spotlights in here. When I go back to my scene and I press F8 on your keyboard, you can see straight away the effect of these lights. When you press the F8 button, you can see or preview the shadows that these lights will be casting. So moving on to our next layer of lights, I'm going to switch on these lights. Let me just double check which ones they are. It is these spotlights in here on top of the counter and the dining table in here. So when I select one of these lights in here in the kitchen, I move in there just to give you a little closer look. Once again, I have this emissive material in here, so it looks like it is creating a light source. I am not using line light in here, as you can see, even though the light itself, the light fixture itself is very narrow. You could easily use the line light in Lumion. I'm not using that one for the reason being that the line light in Lumion does not cast shadows. That's why I'm using 4 of these spotlights. I'm basically using a little trick in here. You can use more if you want to, but I think 4 or 5 is enough to create a nice and even light on top of the counter. Here is the beam, what it looks like. It's kind of a medium cone or medium size cone or beam of light. Here is the brightness and the color of the light. I want white once again. I narrowed the cone angle just a little bit so it doesn't spread too much on the wall around here, and it concentrates on the counter in here. And the same thing I'm using in here, but these are individual spotlights on these individual lights on top of the dining table. It is very similar preset. As you can see, almost the same brightness and the color temperature of the light and the cone angle as well. So when I go back to my render preset and I press F8, now you can see clearly the difference. The shadow that is casted or being cast by the counter, and also in here around on top of the table, the chairs, around the whole table itself. If I did not use spotlights in here and use the line lights, there would be absolutely no shadow coming from the counter or the chairs, and that would not look realistic at all. So that is the reason why I'm using the spotlights on the line light in here as well. Moving on to our next layer of lights. Let's switch them on. It is, I can see in here, it is these line lights that I was talking about just a second ago. I'm using it for these ghost lights in the ceiling. As you can see, here are the line lights, here is the shape. Now this is the brightness that I'm using, and I have to obviously adjust the width and the length of the light so it does fit in the ceiling in here. And also very important, get the right balance in between the brightness and the fall of the distance of the light coming from the source, because as I said before, there is another line light in here behind, basically the same value. As I said before, these lights, the line lights, they do not cast shadows, one, and two, they go through the materials. They will penetrate the materials and they will light up the scenes that you don't want them to light up. So that is the reason you need to find a really nice balance in between the brightness and the fall of the light itself. So when we go to our scene preset in here and I press F8, you will not see any change in here. You see all these spotlights, they cast shadows. These line lights, they do not cast shadows, and also they would go through the material. So if we go on the other side of the wall, you could see a little light being penetrated through the material. So very careful with those type of lights. Moving on to our next layer of lights, let's switch them on. And it's these lights, basically the lights from the chandelier itself. Now this is a little tricky setup, so I'm going to show you how I did that. I'm using two types of lights in here. As you can see, there is a couple of lights in here, and here we have another type of light in Lumion, specifically called the Omni light. This is the light that is emitted from the light source in 360 degrees, basically all over the place from the source. The advantage of this light, it lights up the scene very quickly and very evenly, but the disadvantage is, once again, it penetrates the material and also does not cast shadow. So once again, you have to work with the brightness and the fall off very well to get your desired effect. Now I'm using a little warmer light. All of the lights I'm using are basically a daylight or a cold light. For this one, I want to use a warm light. That's why I'm using as you can see, the tint or the color of the light in here I chose. And now moving on to these spotlights, why I actually put them in here. Here they are, as you can see, 4 of them. The reason being, I'm complementing the light from these Omni lights. As I mentioned, Omni lights would not cast shadows, and obviously when the light is emitted in the real life and has got object in its path, it will cast shadows. So that's the reason for these spotlights. So I'm using 4 of them, 1 for each side of the room. So basically you select one of the lights and you aim them at a particular wall. This one is aiming the wall just ahead of us. You can use the tool in here, the target light tool, and you basically select anywhere on this wall and the light will point in that direction. Here is the brightness of the light and the cone angle as well. As you can see, as wide as possible. So I'm basically mimicking the Omni light from these light sources. I'm matching the temperature of the light from these bulbs. And when we go back to our preset scene and I press F8 key on my keyboard, once again we can see the difference. Now you can see the temperature of these lights is a little yellowish. It is warm, much warmer than these whites around it. And now you can see these shadows in here are not coming from these Omni lights that are on those bulbs, but they are coming from those 4 spotlights that I placed on top of the ceiling, just to be able to create the shadows in here from the table, from these metal structures on the chandelier as well. So that's pretty much the setup for the lights. I'm gonna go through all the effects very quickly. Now we have this lens flare effect in here for this specific reason. So the visible lights basically get a little bit of halo around it, so it looks more realistic. Now I have real skies using in here. It's actually not a very important effect in here. I just want the outside of the house to be visible just a little bit. There is a kind of like a early or late evening, early night in there. So I'm using the real skies. The sun is disabled. Sharpening tool can bring up the intensity just a little bit. Exposure in here, I'm bringing the exposure up just to get a little bit more light on the interior. Color correction, obviously I'm bringing it down, getting a little warmer feel from the interior, and the tint as well. The brightness is somewhere around here, but the contrast goes up. I have a lot of spotlights in here, and we know that the spotlights, they create very strong shadows and the contrast, as you can see in here in the kitchen. So the dark area are dark, and the light up area need to be nice and bright. So we bring the contrast up a little bit here. Moving on to reflection. I chose all the reflective surfaces inside the house. Specifically this glass in here will have reflection from the kitchen, and also in here from the dining. I'm choosing the floor because it is semi-glossy, so we'll have some reflections in there. Not to forget this table, because this is a glass table, so we'll have nice reflections from that one. And basically that is it. We have 3 planes in here. Moving on to the hyperlight. Well, since we are working with the interior, we want a little bit of the light bounce from the object. So I'm bringing the amount up a little bit from the preset that is usually in the middle. Skylight. Once again, I'm bringing the brightness down. I don't want too much light coming inside from the outside and bouncing around. So I'm bringing it down. Saturation can stay as it is. Render quality normal, so it doesn't take too long to render. Shadow. Now the coloring I'm bringing up because I have a lot of white lights in here. These spotlights are all white, so I don't want it to be too yellowish. Only this part. So I just brought it up to keep the white balance right in here. Now the brightness is down just a little bit in here. Interior exterior slider is on the interior, since we are working with the interior, and the Omni shadow goes down, not too strong for the interior. Now one more important thing, I'm turning off the soft shadows in here because as I mentioned, I have a lot of spotlights in here. If I turn it on, these shadows would be very soft, and as we know, when the light source is this close in here from the object, obviously we need to have strong and sharp shadows, also from the chairs in here and also on the counter. So I'm turning off the soft shadows in here. And chromatic aberrations, you can just bring the dispersion down a little bit. And the last one, depth of field, I use this distance measurement or out of focus feature. As you can see, I put it in here at the end of the living room and turned it on. And then I increase the amount of blur somewhere in the middle, and the foreground background all the way to the background. So basically anything from this point on or behind will be out of focus, especially the exterior in here, and anything from the beginning of the picture or front of the lens camera towards the point will be sharp. So basically the whole living room and kitchen will be in focus. And that is about our effects. We have our lights, so let's go ahead and create our final render. And that is all for today, guys. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.